Hello, everybody. It's your boy VideoVids back on YouTube. I hope everyone is doing very well today. I'm very excited to have with me Anya Leonard, someone who I had, I think maybe 4 years ago now. I think it was maybe even longer. And the world was a very different place 4 years ago. Believe it or not, this is for me on a personal level. This is pre-babies, so pre being a father, pre-lockdowns, pre all of the things that have been happening in the world. And I feel like if there's one person I need to talk to about the state of the West and our identity, it's yourself, Anya. So, Anya, thank you so much for being on.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to talk to you again, and congratulations again. It's a big change in one's life.
Yep, yep.
And it's a good reminder that those are the kind of moments that we have that make us think of the big questions in life. So I'm always happy to talk about that.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. For those of you who are not familiar with classical wisdom, and if you're not, I really think you should be, because honestly, just all the content that they've been producing, and I've been following their stuff for like years now, is just top class stuff. And it's old, but it's new, it's relevant, it's smart, it's funny, it's all of those things. So, Anya, if you could sort of very briefly tell us about yourself and classical wisdom, and then how you got into that space, and why everyone should also sign up as well.
Well, yes, thank you. Well, classical wisdom has actually been around for 10 years. I founded it 10 years ago with a fellow
Wow.
named Bill Bonner. And the idea was to find a way to make the classics self-sustainable because this sort of big project of civilization and humanity, we need to keep these ancient wisdom alive. And if we're sort of at the behest of grants or governments or trends or whatnot, that's a pretty fragile position. So if we can create our own community
Yep.
that makes it sort of self-sustainable, we can be the torchbearers of history and philosophy. About a year ago, we went on to Substack, which I know is sort of the new cool place to be. We are number 3 in philosophy,
Wow.
after self-help once. I'm just throwing that out there. But we have a free newsletter, and the site's sort of dedicated to bringing ancient wisdom to modern minds. And what we do really is we try to cover the whole ancient world as best as we can, kind of focusing on the Greco-Roman, from like the Minoans at like 1200 BC to all the way to the fall of the Eastern Roman Empire, from Hadrian's Wall to North Africa, all the way to India. So we're really niche, and we really try to show how this philosophy, history, literature, mythology is relevant here and now. So every week, I often take current events or political thoughts or big philosophical questions and tackle them with the sort of classics in mind to see how ancient wisdom can help. And to be honest, most of the time, it's all been done before. So if we
Mm.
kind of look back, it's pretty valuable to try to understand what's happening now.
That's a very good point. We always think the world has never seen this. The world has never seen this problem, whether it's a political one or an economic one. But obviously, when you dive into the classics, you dive into history, it's all, like you said, it's all been done before. It's just different variations or different colors of the same problem. So you're absolutely right. I find the classical world, and more specifically the sort of mythology part of it, absolutely just riveting. I think I'm not sure if I mentioned this last time, but I accidentally stumbled upon it when I was reading Stephen Fry and his Mythos book. Thank you to Audible, because you get one credit a month, and I thought, let me just give this a go. I mean, I don't know anything about mythology, and I like Stephen Fry, so whatever. And then once I got hooked, that was it. I was just listening to that thing all day long, and there just wasn't enough mythology content for me to consume. It was just like, wow. It was like it was like you that you it's like you've been living in a house for 30 years, and all of a sudden you find a new door that you've just never seen before, and then you go in and you think, what the hell, I never knew I had this room inside this door. I never knew I had this room inside this house. And it's just like, wow, it just completely changes your perspective. Um, so before we go into that, I just have one thing to show, and that is, we are doing, my wife and myself are doing a free webinar for people who have left religion, and this is something which we see quite a lot of people leaving religion, and their identity is up in the air. So something which is all I've also changed since last time. I've actually become a coach using my own experiences of leaving Islam and going through all those different troubles. And we are doing a free webinar for people on how to create a new identity after leaving religion, what we wish we knew. So these are like relationships, boundaries, guilt, trauma, meaning, all those things that come up again and again. I've put the link in the chat below and in the YouTube description for this video. But without any further ado, um, Anya, I want to ask you, okay, why, this is the most basic question, and I guess this applies to not only Greek mythology, but all mythology across the world. But with regards to the West specifically, why is Greek mythology so important? Is it something which most people nowadays overlook? I mean the common man, the common woman, they don't really understand the water that they're swimming in.
Yeah, mythology has been hugely, hugely important in the entire history of civilization from the very, very beginning. And I know a lot of people like to just say, oh, it's fantasy.
Mm,
It doesn't really make sense. And, sure, there are a lot of reasons and functions of myth. And in the very beginning, a lot of those ones were, explaining the supernatural or the beginnings of our history. But a lot of them have maintained really important lessons. Some of them, record history, like the natural disasters and floods and earthquakes. They can record history, like major events, man-made ones, like wars. You think of
mm,
the Trojan War. These have been ways that we have preserved the knowledge of history. And sometimes these things have been extremely, instructional. These myths. I always think of the story during the Boxing Day tsunami, and there was an indigenous tribe that had a myth that whenever they see the ocean go away, that they should run up a mountain. And so, sure enough, they saw the ocean go away and they ran up. So there's this preserved myth
mm.
of what to do in this extreme situation, saved this tribe, saved their civilization. So you have all these basic instructions, but one thing we say often at Classical Wisdom is, history is myth and myth is history. So a
Mm,
lot of these myths have these really important grains, seeds initially of the history of a people, of a community, of a religion, all these things. So just from a purely historical standpoint, a lot of these myths have massive amounts of
yeah.
information and importance. But of course, they also can teach us a lot about how we should live and how we should interact with each other. And that's a really critical element of myth.
Absolutely. I think one quote which I can't remember, maybe you know where it's from. I can't remember where I heard it now, but it was saying that myth never was, but always is. Something along those lines, where it's okay. Historically speaking, you know, we can't take it literally, but there's an element of myth that's always going to be true, regardless of whether it's historical or factual. It does speak to the human story, and like you were saying earlier, that these stories, like the problems we're facing now, they've been done thousands of years ago. There's nothing quote unquote new that comes up. So I guess in that sense, myths are always going to be relevant. But I would say, just to sort of preface this conversation, I think the West, economically, you could say socially, from an identity point of view, morally, even the way we start questioning our own founding fathers or own ancestors, in this saying that they were immoral people and they were bad people, or how do we view ourselves in the world? There's China rising, India rising, various things going on, and in the West, I think we're not really sure of who we are. There's a group of people, you could say, that want to assert ourselves, and there's a group of people that is terrified of asserting themselves. And I think the common man or woman doesn't know what to do. I don't think we know where to, like, if we can be proud of who we are, or should we be apologetic of who we are, if that makes sense. Um, what role do you think myth has in playing in sort of, I guess, reframing this conversation, right? Because like you're saying, these problems keep coming up again and again. um how can myth help us in this sense?
Well, I think realizing that every society at all times has these stories that are filled with people and characters and gods that are both good and bad.
Yeah.
That there's never going to be one perfect society that has ever
Mm,
existed. That the tendencies to fall from grace, to fall to hubris and excessive pride, kind of happen again and again, that people individually want glory. Like when you see the sort of universal elements of these different myths, I personally find it very reassuring, and humbling that, we're all part of this great project of called civilization, and that we need to contribute to it in the best that we can. And by learning some of these lessons of the past, we can hopefully avoid some of the pitfalls,
Yeah.
as well as aim for a better virtuous life.
Yeah.
And that is, at the heart of many of these myths is what kind of person do you want to be, and
Mm.
how can you be that person for your family, for your community, for your society, and what are you contributing? And so when we go back to stories where we have heroes, we think, okay, what is good about this hero? Why should we emulate them? Or what is it that makes them a warning, a cautionary tale? And again, you see these over and over again. You
Yeah.
go, okay, what lessons can we glean from that? So I think looking back at those stories, they could tell us a lot about who we are, but it's not so judgmental because we don't we aren't somehow removed from this
Yeah.
past history. We're a
Yeah.
continuation of it.
And one thing, actually, that's a very good point. This is, I guess, one of the the most important things, or the most striking things, that one of the things that struck me the most when I was like my first impression of Greek mythology, when I was first reading it and sort of getting into that world. So I'm coming from an Abrahamic point of view, which is like Christianity, Islam, where there's God is always right, God is always moral, His prophets are usually always moral, and we're in sin or we have to redeem ourselves, and the prophet, the book, the god, they're always perfect. Whereas if you go into Greek mythology, that's not the case. Like Zeus, and they don't even pretend to be perfect. They don't pretend to be the par excellence of morality or anything like that. So I guess that was a big shock for me, because I'm like, wait, because in my mind, God is supposed to be perfect, and these guys are supposed to be the moral examples, but that wasn't the case. And I realized, like, and especially, I guess this speaks to the way the whole, whether it's woke movement or sort of whichever movement you want to be, or the anti-woke movement, is that they're trying to pursue some sort of moral perfection one way or the other. Whereas in the Greek world, that doesn't exist, and I think that's far more reflective of reality. Because even in empires, which is a dirty word now, you'll find good things, and even in democracies that are supposed to be good, you'll find many bad things. And having that nuance when you read mythology, and understanding that humans can be good and bad, gods can be good and bad, and sometimes you find, like, you find yourself rooting for the guy that actually displays less moral qualities, kind of like an almost anti-hero kind of thing, right? And I guess, just to throw in there, Hector versus Achilles. Like, Hector is actually the
Way better.
way better. Like, on every ground, he is. If we're going to say a hero in terms of moral character, he is. He's the one, right? He's the one. But I guess from the Greeks' perspective, that their guy was Achilles. So if we want to win this war, we have to back Achilles, and Achilles sometimes is a mama's boy, and he throws his toys out the pram. So again, but we can see his physical qualities on the battlefield. So it's mixed, right? And that's what the biggest thing that I learned from Greek mythology and mythology in general, that it's not perfect. And stop trying to make things perfect or fit in a particular box. And that's why I would say that's the biggest difference for me personally between Abrahamic religions and then the ancient mythology.
No, I think that's an excellent point. And it's interesting because yes, you're right. The gods are a reflection of normal people. Like they get petty, they get
Yeah,
jealous. They can be small. They can also be grand and show wonderful
yeah,
skills and abilities. But they can be all of it. So it's a more accurate
yeah,
mirror to humanity and something that we can see more of ourselves in. But there's also really interesting studies about how people interact with regards to judgment and shame and morality when you have a pantheistic society versus monotheistic. Because
mm,
if you've only got one god, everybody has to believe in that person, right or wrong. Whereas if you've got many gods, you can actually relate to other people who are from
yeah,
different backgrounds in a way. Like there's a much greater diversity,
absolutely.
and so there's a less kind of polarization of beliefs. And it's very interesting too because the Greek gods, incorporated gods from other countries and
Yes,
cultures.
yeah,
Dionysus was originally like from Egypt and Africa. Like
mm,
a lot of there's Babylonian. I mean, these gods were a collection of the society, and it was a way that when you had empires or colonization or people, they would incorporate the new gods, and you see
Absolutely.
the Romans would do that as well. So it
Well,
was
yeah, I
actually a
mean,
much more inclusive tactic.
100%. No, you're absolutely right. I mean, there's always there's that meme on Facebook or YouTube or Instagram where this sort of typical scenario where someone's in an exam hall writing something, and the person next to him is sort of copying, and it's like the Greek person is the one writing and the Roman person is the one copying from the Greeks, right? But no, you're absolutely right. But even the Greeks, they took from the Egyptians, the Eastern Europeans, the Persians, or Hindu mythology, and so many other mythologies as well. I mean, we can even, I think people have even traced back to, I think I was reading about Ares being from somewhere slightly more Eastern Europe, or I can't remember where he was from. And then like centaurs were originally like Persian bowmen, things like that. It's like, oh my god, it makes sense, right? So you're absolutely right. It's like we take the best stories or the best characters from wherever and everywhere, whoever we come in contact with, and then you integrate that into your own story. Um, which is I guess the proper use of the word diversity. I mean, it's literally the proper use of the word diversity, as opposed to some sort of tokenism.
And
And
it's, yeah,
so
just
go
say
for it.
it's
Yeah, yeah.
very, no, no, it's very important to note that, we have that on the grand scale when we think of the gods and who was worshipped and whatnot. But also, just even Homer, who is very foundational, of course, for the Greeks and the Romans, and all of Western civilization.
Mm,
I mean, Homer is sort of like the first step of everything. And one of the reasons that the Iliad and the Odyssey really resonated across the entire region is because it actually has traditions and characters from all over the Pan-Hellenic
yes.
world. And so even the main books were really inclusive. And so I think for modern readers, they might not appreciate or realize, oh, there's this tradition here and this island's here, and they might not realize that it's already a patchwork of so many different peoples and beliefs and cultures already just in that first book. So
Mm.
it really, as you say, like that diversity was fundamental to their beliefs, which is just fantastic.
Now, I want to get to the hard questions now, which is we are where we are in terms of the West. We have this almost massive identity crisis. I was saying to you before we went live, the Abrahamic faiths have had their turn. Okay, you guys, whether it's Christianity or Islam, whether it's how people view Islam as this intrusive or invading force, and they see Christianity as a weak force that people don't really believe in anymore. There might be people have been saying that there's a resurgence of cultural Christianity. I mean, even Richard Dawkins was saying that he would much prefer a cultural Christianity. He likes church bells and stuff, but the Christians are saying you've been destroying Christianity for the last 20, 30 years, and now you realize whatever. So this internal debate going on. Now, if the government tomorrow said we need a mythical well, I don't know what you want to call it, advisor, and they say, Anya, okay, tomorrow 8 o'clock you're going to present why and how we need, or how we can use these stories to, I guess, find our way back. We need a new renaissance. Okay, what would be the first thing you would try and do? Like, what would be your thinking about, what, we are at crossroads, we don't know who we are, we're fighting ourselves, we need a new way forward.
Well, you were right when you're saying this is not the easy questions. I mean,
Yeah,
it's,
what?
it's pretty fundamental to philosophy and society in general. I mean, and it is definitely up to debate. Like, I'm not going to say that I necessarily have the answers because I certainly don't.
Of course, I'm not going to hold
Um,
you to it. Trust me, I'm not going to I'm not going to hold you to it. Don't worry.
Okay, that was a bit stressful. No, it's interesting because I do think mythologies have a way I mean, they definitely have a way of uniting people, and it's very
Mm,
important. It's also important to realize like we're living under mythologies right now that we
yes.
might not even be aware of. And so even people who, are the most religious Christians right now, like if you go back to early Christianity and read the poetry of the Latin Christians and look what they were talking about, like it would be pretty unrecognizable to what most Christians believe today. Like as the religions that they see and experience them, they have evolved, and those myths have evolved with them. And most people don't read, the original Greek or the original Hebrew or Aramaic, go
Mm,
back to the original languages. So they might not appreciate or get to enjoy to see how these these ideas have evolved
Yeah.
already. So I think one of the main elements that probably we could approach in society is this idea of eudaimonia, of human flourishing. And
Mm.
a lot of that actually comes from the philosophers, but it's you see it a lot in the mythologies as well. And one of my favorite myths to go is, you know, the story of Hercules. And
Mm.
there's a great element of his story. And for those who don't know it, poor Hercules is sort of tormented by Hera because he's the result of one of many of Zeus's infidelities, and Hera just is has a way with kind of attacking those who are innocent victims. And I have plenty to say about Hera. It's actually being incorporated in a pre-Greek tradition as well in a different format, but
Mm.
that's maybe for later. Um, but in the story, you know, Hercules is driven mad and kills his family, and then he has to atone for this bloody act, even though he was not motivated to do this. He still did the
He was
action.
possessed by anger, which Hera caused, I believe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's, I mean, it's an interesting element because we live in a society, motivation matters for everything. But in the Greeks, it's the action. Even if you didn't
Mm.
mean to do it, you're still held accountable. Um, so he has to do the 12 labors, you know, to atone for his sins essentially. But the point that I like is there's this moment when he's walking down the road and he sees these two women and they kind of come to him and they say, you know, here's your choice of how you want to live your life. And, you know, the one beautiful woman says, oh, come with me and you'll have this wonderful life and it'll be so pleasurable and you'll be having such a nice time and it's going to be fantastic. And just, you know, come over this way. And then the other woman who's kind of, you know, not so beautifully dressed, who's kind of plain, says, now, I'm not going to promise you that. I'm going to promise you a hard life. It's going to be tricky, but you will be respected and you will earn your place in your community as a good person.
Mm.
And these two women are representing Kakaya, the goddess of vice and immorality, and then Arete, which is, you know, this concept of excellence and virtue. And Hercules chooses famously virtue, even though it's going to be hard. You still want to live the virtuous life. And I think at its very fundamental, that is the concept that is absolutely essential for
Mm.
a happy life, a happy family, a happy community. That finding the elements of returning to virtue as a goal.
Virtue. Yep. And I think just as a couple of points there. I think it's actually very important. I think you can correct me if I'm wrong here. It's the Greek version of his name Heracles is directly Heracles, like so glory through Hera. And I was reading that there is reading about this, and it could mean two different. It's a double interpretation. The first one is that his parents knew that Hera was going to be after him because of course, she goes after Zeus's sons or daughters, whatever it may be. So they were trying to, on one side, placate her to be like, listen, we've named him after you, so could you just go easy on him, right? The other side of that is like glory through Hera, meaning glory through the challenges Hera put in front of him, and it speaks to what you were just saying now around that he chose the harder option, the virtuous option, which is, I want a challenging life, but I want to be a virtuous, respected man. And I think on a slight side point, there's a lot of crisis around masculinity, in terms of a lot of men don't know their role or what to do and how to find themselves. And I think Hercules is literally the perfect example of that, which is, yes, it wasn't your fault that of course, kill your family, hopefully they won't do that. But you know what I'm saying? That like sometimes it's not your fault that you do bad things or you find yourself in a bad place. But it is your fault if you don't do anything about it and you don't embrace your own 12 labors. Every man and woman, but especially in this masculinity kind of way, every man has their 12 labors, right? So I guess you just have to embrace it and resist that female who was saying have an easy life, virtuous life, whether it be now again the modern day version that would be like pornography, obesity, gaming, just sitting down in front of your computer all day, or you go out there and you slay the dragons or whatever it may be. So you're absolutely right. I think um, when you watch the Disney version of Hercules, you don't really get that sense. But I guess it's for children, so I guess
Yeah,
Yeah,
as a
it's
yeah,
yeah.
Disney usually has a way of changing things. Yeah, no, just to say, like, and I'd love to get into some of the other philosophies to back up a lot of these ideas too. But one of the greatest ones from Epictetus, who's a Stoic philosopher who was a slave turned philosopher, and he says it's difficulties in which show men who they are.
Mm,
And I think that's really critical that you say, you know, you need the conflict and tension in your life to prove yourself, to know who you are, to test your mettle. And I think, in a way, it's kind of the tragedy for our society now is that it's very much a victim culture that we're,
yep.
you know, we've got to tally up our points and see where we stand. And but like in the ancient world, you wanted to be the hero, like, and
Mm,
being the hero is hard. It's
yeah,
harder to be a hero.
it's not
So
easy. Yeah.
the idea that you've got to find your challenges and you've got to overcome them, and that's what makes a good person. And you know that goes straight back to like 7th century BC philosophy when we go to like Heraclitus. That these conflicts and tensions is actually where we get progress and ability and accomplishment. So the fact that we want as a general rule, and I'm not saying I'm better than everybody else. Like I definitely, you know, have the desire to sometimes just sit on my couch and do nothing. A lot of times, I'll be honest.
I'm with
But
you. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
we choose the easy path rather than the difficult path. And but I think the more we test doing the difficult path, and then we feel the reward afterwards,
Hmm.
then we'll get that sense of flourishing and happiness that we're missing.
Absolutely. I think I guess this is the other side of the flip side of the coin when it comes to when you the West has created an amazing world, then you create luxuries, then you overcome poverty, you overcome so many of the issues that we had 200 years ago, 300 years ago. So the children born without who were born in an era without having to overcome those problems don't really know what you're talking about. They just take whatever comforts we have for granted. But I do think that psychologically, I'm not psychologist, but psychologically, if you're born in an era or you have a life that's too easy, you kind of you're almost looking for something to overcome, right? And whether again, I'm just speaking way out of turn. Whether and I think a lot of the anxiety, depression, or mental health issues is like you need a tough life to challenge yourself and grow as a person. And it's in a culture where you were saying we're looking for the easy way out. We're not encouraging our children to be either Hercules or someone like Atalanta or whatever it may be. Then it's no wonder why a lot of people are unhappy.
Well, and you, I mean, identified it from the beginning. Like if you don't have meaning or purpose, then it's well, what's the point?
Right?
Like,
No, you're absolutely right. Yeah.
and then you can have everything you want. And this is the thing that's always amazing. People always think, oh, you know, if I just make that little bit extra more money, or if I get that new house or cool car or the nicest outfit, or, you
Yeah.
know, I get my hair done and this and that, like if I get that little bit more, then I'll be happy.
Yeah.
And again, the Stoics are really good about talking about that because they're like, well, if you're not happy with what you have now, what
Mm.
makes you think you'll be happy with what you have later? You know, they,
Can I?
because you
Yeah.
have something maybe more than you had last week, and
Yeah.
that didn't make you happy. You're not, if you're not appreciating what you have at the moment, then why do you think that would change?
Sorry, just whenever I heard that quote, I mean, you may have heard it from the Stoics, but I heard it from that movie, Cool Runnings. I don't know if you're familiar with that movie, Cool Runnings,
Oh yeah.
where the Jamaican Jamaica puts in a team to for the Winter Olympics of all countries. Jamaica, sunny, hot Jamaica, and they do all their training, all this kind of stuff, whatever. And right at the end, just before the race, one of the guys goes to the coach, how, like, what if we don't win it? Like, he gets no, like, last minute nerves, and the coach says, if you're not enough without it, you'll never be enough with it. And I think, you know, this idea that just more, whatever we get, that one more promotion, that one more money, or whatever it is, then I'll be enough. But you're right. You're enough now. You just don't know it.
Yeah.
I think that's the crucial point. Um, Speaking of now, this is something which is my opinion. So you're more than welcome to disagree and inform me on this. But I really think if we are going to have a renaissance or have a new founding myth in the West, the person or the titan that I would center that around would be, you could say Hercules. I think Hercules is a very good alternative. But for me, personally speaking, it would be Prometheus, because within Prometheus, I see all the qualities that you could say require bravery. Where with Hercules, it was a physical, he had to overcome physical obstacles. With Prometheus, of course, there is some element of physicality, but for him, the challenge was here, and it meant going against Zeus, who was the authority. So I don't know if you wanted to sort of briefly go over the story of how human beings have fire and technology and arts and culture and all that kind of stuff, and then we could sort of break down the sort of importance of Prometheus.
Yeah, no, Prometheus is it's a fantastic tale, and it is a really important one. I mean, it's sort of like him and his brother. So Prometheus means forethought, and his brother Epimentheus means hindsight or afterthought. Are tasked with sort of creating the world's creatures, and Prometheus's brother Epimetheus is like he's having a grand old time. He's making things quickly, and he's adding claws and fangs, and he's like getting out the basket of all the cool stuff and just throwing it on all of his tigers and bears and snakes and those, and he's having a blast. But he's just doing it quickly without thinking. And
Mm.
Prometheus, on the other hand, is just carefully spending his time crafting the perfect creature, which is the human. And he's
Yeah.
so dedicated, and he spends all of his time on this one creature, and he gets so focused and making it so perfect. And by the time he finishes, he looks over his brother, and he's used up all the good stuff, you
Mm.
know? And the poor human has no fangs, no claws, no spikes and poisons and darts and whatnot. So the poor human just has to go out in the world just naked and defenseless. And but he's been well crafted, so hope for the best. And poor Prometheus, they send them down, and he's looking over, and he's like, "Oh, my poor creations, my poor humans, they're doing so poorly. They're a little kind of being pathetic, and they're dying
Mm.
all the time, and they can't even keep warm. Where's their fur? I mean, and he's really feeling for them. So he sneaks up Mount Olympus, and he steals the fire from the gods, and he hides it in a little hollow piece of wood so they can't see, and he brings it down and he gives it to the humans so that they can have fire. And then with this fire, they can stay warm. They don't need the fur. They can defend themselves against animals, and then the humans, thrive. And then, of course, when Zeus finds out, he's livid. He's like, "You're stole from the gods. This isn't right." And so he punishes poor immortal Prometheus by, chaining him to a rock and having his liver eaten every day by an eagle. And then every night it heals up, and so it happens and again until our boy Hercules comes and lets him down. So Hercules, I'm going back to Hercules, I think.
Okay, so we've got a Prometheus versus Hercules. Maybe we can have a vote on that. That's interesting. Okay.
But yeah, I mean, to your point, there's definitely wonderful aspects of it, like the planning, forethought, being careful, how to adapt when you don't
Mm.
have something, being resourceful. But Prometheus, there is definitely the echoes of sacrifice that you would, I think, would compare to a lot of the mythologies you see in Christianity. That this idea of giving yourself for the people. I mean,
Mm.
definitely fundamental. I mean, it is a good one. Um, Pandora doesn't come out so well in that one.
Well, not a lot of women in mythology come out well, but that's a whole other thing. Um, One thing I would also say is the reason why I like Prometheus so much is because if you remember right at the beginning, remember he's a Titan. He's not an Olympian. He's not a god. Well, they're all technically gods, but he's not an Olympian god. And he's the first, the earlier generations of Titans. And when there was the Titan War, the Titanomachy, I can't say it properly, the Titanomachy, he sides with the Olympians over his own kind in favor of this new era, this new reign. Okay, and then he sides with the humans over Zeus, right? Zeus is the most powerful god of all, and he sides with the humans over Zeus, knowing full well that if he goes against him, he's going to be in for it, right? And he does the right thing at every moment. So for me, it's like if like and the reason why I suppose I like him more is because he's willing to go against authority for the um for the sake of development and progress in the arts and sciences, if that makes sense. And I think we need that right now. Is whether you're left wing or right wing, I guess there is an anti-authoritarian side to both wings and to every human being. No one is completely a slave in that sense. So if you want to, and the whole point of this is if you want to introduce skepticism and free thought, for me, Prometheus is the guy, if that makes sense. So that's kind of why I've gone for him as my. Sorry, my son's just trying to come in. So that's why I've gone for him as the archetype. Sorry, 1 second. Okay, sorry, just I've got my own titans here. Yeah, so that's kind of why I thought Prometheus would be the perfect person or the perfect titan to sort of
I'm not sure if we're still alive or not, but I think I've lost you. I'm hoping you can come back. I think Prometheus is an excellent choice, if I do say so. I'm not sure if it's still alive or not. So um, maybe I should just fill in a bit about some other Greek mythologies. I would say that one thing that I find is really interesting is that when it comes to Greek mythology, it sort of starts off with a very fantastic world of the very beginnings, as we were talking about before, the theogony. We start off with the beginnings and the gods and how they fight over. And there's sort of a nice over arc of Greek mythology that sort of moves from the gods to the men. And I think that's always a really interesting progress that kind of maybe echoes Prometheus's forethought. Anyway, so it kind of moves from the gods to the mortals. So I was just filling in the kind of trajectory of Greek
you
mythology.
you're absolute pro. Sorry about that. My son, as he walked past, he pulled out the charger unknowingly. So we are always at the behest of the gods,
Yes.
and sometimes things happen. You got to move on. But no, thank you so much for that. So yeah, I guess just to continue or finish my point,
Yeah.
the fact that he's willing to stand up against authority, he's willing to think for himself, he has that forethought. And going back to what we were saying now, we live in a society where all we think about is now. We just want to be happy now. But if you think about the future, then you have to give up the present for a better future, if that makes sense. And the last thing is he kind of saves Zeus's backside, but with the prophecy, giving the prophecy that if whoever has a child from Thetis, I believe, yeah, from Thetis, the son will be stronger than the father. And
Yeah.
then all the gods were like, back off, no one wanted to go for Thetis, and it was I forgot his name now. What's his dad's name? Son of Peleus, the human who had to marry another child with Thetis, which kind of saved the gods. Because if Achilles was a god stronger than Zeus, then you know, wow. I mean, that would have been an amazing story, but that would have been the end of the Olympians and everyone else as we know it. So I guess that kind of founding, I guess, myth for me would be if I had to advise a government or advise a school or advise children, like if I had to start them off somewhere, I would say he's the guy. And I guess that puts him in direct competition with someone like a Jesus. Um, um, or or Muhammad. And the reason why I would go for Prometheus is because he does those things without any like he's not promised heaven afterwards.
Hmm.
There's no like people say, oh, you should be selfless or do the right thing, but he's not rewarded with heaven. He's not rewarded with anything afterwards. He's free, fine, but it's not like an extra reward for that. He has no get out of jail free cards. He can't call his dad and say like, help me out or whatever it is. And no, this is it. And I think, of course, none of these people exist. Or Prometheus doesn't exist. But for me, it's like if you want proper sacrifice for the future, then he's the guy for me. And then I guess going back to what you were saying, Hercules would be a very good number two in terms of like a physically giving up, like the physical side of sacrifice, if that makes sense. Um, and I think people in the past have compared Jesus and Prometheus because they were both, I guess, Jesus is on a cross and Prometheus on the Caucasus Mountains, nailed to the Caucasus Mountains, so on and so. There is some kind of resemblance. I'm not saying that one is directly copied from another, but there is some resemblance from that. And the one thing I was reading up on this, and you can tell me if I'm wrong or if I'm being conspiratorial about Prometheus, is that like when I actually went to Athens and Rome last year, and I saw plenty of Zeus statues and Athena and Ares and Apollo and Hephaestus and all these guys, but I saw nothing of Prometheus. And then when you go into the souvenir shops, I was like, oh, okay, this has got all these amazing, where's Prometheus? And they're like, and then the woman I was talking to, she had to ask, Who's that? Who's that?" And then she asked someone else, goes, "Oh, you mean Promethea? Oh, okay. Oh, yeah. Sorry, we don't have enough." So and then I was reading somewhere that that archetype is so dangerous because if you were to actually celebrate that, then you're telling people to think for yourself, to go against authority. That's very dangerous for governments or for the church or for whatever it is. So I don't know if I'm looking too much into it, but you can tell me if that archetype almost is too dangerous to be celebrated.
Well, okay, so I have a few thoughts.
Go for it. Go for it.
One, okay, as you were saying before, I really liked what you were saying before about he is foresight, he's forethought. So, I mean, the fact that he does things that are right in the end would make sense because he knows what's going to happen. Um, and as a general rule, with the kind of span of the gods, and I was sort of saying this a little bit when you were off air for a bit, that there's kind of like a long arc of you kind of start with these primordial gods, and then you get into the Titans, and then the Olympians, and then it moves to like the half mortals, and then you get into the Age of Heroes, and there is like a whole spectrum of gods and myths of which we can partake. A lot of the primordial gods and earlier gods, were subsumed from other cultures. And so I kind of referenced this earlier that like one of the weird inconsistencies that we see is like somebody like Hera, who is, very unlikable. Like you're like, what is this woman doing? Like she's mean, she's petty, she's just does all these horrible
Vengeful.
things.
Yeah.
She's vengeful. Like who would like her? And yet the fascinating thing is that in the ancient Greek temples, there are temples for Hera everywhere. And there are temples that are older and bigger and more important for Hera than they are for Zeus. And you're like, what's up with that? Like, were the ancient Greek women just like really into like mean chicks or something? But actually, it's because she was pre-Greek. And
Right.
she was, closer to like the Minoans, and when the Mycenaeans came, they brought their gods like Zeus and literally had him marry and tame her. So sometimes the gods that we see now have gone through sort of they tell their own story of the history, and they have to have been approved by the Romans, and then they have to have gone through sort of the Middle Ages and such like that. So, another good example, and this is an interesting point, is that a lot of the earliest version of the gods, women were way more powerful. Like women were more powerful in the Bronze Age and the Iron Age. And it wasn't really till the classical age that they had a lot of their power taken. So same thing, Demeter and Hestia, like Hestia was the goddess of the hearth and the fireplace, and she was incredibly important. And there's temples for her everywhere. But if you were to like tell people to list off the gods that they think of Zeus. So the gods that we think of now, the mythologies that even we're perpetuating, are a reflection of our society rather than the earlier societies in which they lived. So I think you can see the Romans thinking, well, I'm not sure we want to use that one as much. So at every stage, the different stories are going to reflect different values, norms, ideals, expectations, taboos along the way, and who is being worshipped at different times will tell you a lot about the what the society was like at that moment.
So two points. I think that's very accurate. Actually, that's very true. The gods themselves are not static in the way that they're perceived by human beings. They go through their own evolution, and one of the best examples of that is actually Ares to Mars. Like Ares
Yep.
is hated amongst the gods, even in the Iliad when Zeus says, you're one of the most worst people, gods. You remind me of your mother. Literally the worst thing you could possibly say. You remind me of Hera, right? And Ares, has to lick his wounds. And Ares is the god of war. Yet he's, as far as I'm aware, and I've really searched this on YouTube, Google, and even ChatGPT, he's never won a war. As far as I'm aware, he's never actually won anything. Yet he's the god of war, so it's a bit embarrassing, and he's a bit of an embarrassment, especially when he gets caught with what's her name,
Aphrodite.
Aphrodite, the whole
Yep.
thing with her fire. So he's a bit of an embarrassment. But in the Roman version as Mars, he's completely, he's very respectable.
Yep.
He's second to Zeus. So I guess because they were a martial people, they were a more warrior-like people. So for them, they were like, we can't have Ares like this. We need to elevate his status and make him more important. So yes, he went through that evolution and got a massive promotion,
Yep.
and was like two fingers up to everyone else.
Yeah.
Imagine him being adopted by the Romans. He's like, oh, finally someone sees the need for my ability. So I absolutely agree with you. The gods' evolution and their relative importance tells us more about the people than about the gods.
Yep.
The second point: has there ever been? I mean, maybe it's impossible to answer. A society that's valued Prometheus or valued that kind of character.
There are early worshippers of Prometheus. I mean, there definitely are. And I was just looking it up earlier. And maybe the issue we have, of course, when dealing with the ancient world is that like 90%
Is gone.
is
Yeah.
gone.
Yeah.
So, and that is a huge percentage. So you could have easily had a full massive cult dedicated to him that, on an island that had a volcano and, we don't know
It's
anymore.
gone. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But to maybe your main point initially about sort of replacing the myth with the Prometheus myth, well, I agree. There's a lot of things I like about him, and I think you outlined excellent points. I think we should always still be wary of just sort of swapping one story for another, and that one of the benefits that we first said about the myths to
Yeah.
begin
Yeah.
with
Yeah.
is that there are so many.
So many. Yeah.
And that, for instance, you were saying, okay, you've got this anti-authoritarian figure. Further down in the spectrum of the land of the mortals, for women, for instance, Antigone is a fantastic character,
Absolutely.
and is somebody who can speak to a person that pursues what is right and just in the face of death, and will go against an unjust law. She's really an exemplary person in that regard. And it's interesting too. She can speak to different people depending on what their situations are. And I know, like, for women, for people who have survived a civil war, and I'm very happy to say that I haven't, so I did not have this perspective. But when talking to professors who were talking about this, they're saying that, for people who've suffered civil wars and not been able to bury their dead, like Antigone, that whole myth really spoke to them on a really deep and personal level. So I think it's wonderful that we have so many myths to draw
So many.
on.
Yeah. Absolutely. No, you're
And
right. You're
yeah,
absolutely right. I mean, I'm being overzealous with my pro Prometheus, agenda here, but you're absolutely right. You can literally pick so many different characters, um, you know, and as you were saying before, even someone like a Hector, even though he's quote unquote on the losing side, if you want to know how to be honorable, Hector's your guy. I mean, he does it from top to bottom. He's the most honorable person in that whole war, he's on the losing side, and he's not on the Greek side, which I don't really. I've always thought about this. Like, why is it that the Greeks, they made the opposite hero far more honorable than their own guy?
so this is actually, again, a reflection of having many gods. Because if you worship Apollo, you can still say, well, Zeus is still a fine god also. You know what I mean? Like
Mm.
you can, and so um, you treat your enemy very differently. The whole interactions between us and them, the other, is there is another element of it when you
Mm.
have many gods to choose from. And so the fact that, Hector is on the other side, like it's okay to have more than one team.
Mm. Yeah, and I don't know if I'm reading too much. I mean, I don't know, but just going by what you were saying in terms of like the evolution of the gods, but I'm sure that also applies to the evolution of the heroes, right? So would it reflect maybe the Greek society on the way down, and their heroes aren't as I don't know, brave or as honorable as maybe the opposition? Am I reading too much into that?
Well, no, I mean, so the tricky thing is, of course, and this is definitely something to be said when trying to understand the myths, is that to understand the context in which they're written. And to modern sensibilities, a lot of Achilles' anger is unjustified. It seems silly
Mm,
and petty. But to the ancient Greeks, he would have been very justified in his anger. So he's not he's seen in a much better light by ancient eyes than
really,
by
that's
modern
interesting.
eyes.
Wow.
And a lot of his uh, negative characteristics are not as bad. And it's interesting. And this is the concept I often bring up: is the concept of thumos, which is righteous anger. And we kind of live in an era now where the concept of anger is sort of making a comeback. And it's always interesting just having this discussion with Stoics because they don't believe in any anger being righteous.
Mm,
So this would be, I mean, it's another thing I always think is important to remember when talking about the ancient world is that there's no monolithic culture I mean, this was a huge diverse cultures, populations, people who are of different classes, of different dialects, of different backgrounds. When they had their battles, they were like a collection of all sorts of different peoples. Um, you think of like the Battle of 300,
mm,
that would have had, the all sorts. They had the Spartans and the Hoplites, and they had the Daxos and different people from all different regions. So there's not like they thought this because
right.
you could have one group of people just like today going, I totally agree with that, another group of people going like, I don't at all.
Absolutely. So, would it be okay now to transition slightly? So we've gone from mythology to more philosophy. So, and I remember you mentioning something around how the founding fathers of America were very much influenced by Greek philosophy as well. Um,
Oh,
could you,
hugely, yeah.
yeah, could you sort of tell us more about that, please?
Well, so kind of when you first approached me and you were saying, okay, here's the kind of the problem that we're facing in society right now, and I was like, I completely agree with your assessment that we kind of are like a bit lost, and we don't really have shared values and cultures as much, and yeah, so kind of finding purpose can be tricky. And I think while we can find a lot of meaning and morals in myth, you do need to employ a certain level of reason and logic when kind of going through these myths and figuring out what the takeaway is, because obviously sometimes they can be didactic like Hercules, and sometimes they're definitely not a to-do model list of instructions like Oedipus Rex or something like that.
Mm,
Like, so the one thing I think is that ancient philosophy though really has a lot to offer when trying to find meaning and purpose, and that has been a source for people again and again and again and again. And when we talk about renaissances that have occurred, they often occur with the philosophers. And we think of like the most obvious renaissance, like it was sort of described by Plutarch with, hey, let's refine the ancient Greeks and their values, and then the You go right back to the beginning, and a large jumps in society happen when they reject a lot of the myths. Because while we look and we see these myths and great stories and stuff, it fully believed in them, of course. Like that was their religion, not a myth. They didn't see the separation between it. So when you start off with, say, Thales of Miletus, and he, is the first person to kind of, in the Western tradition, say, wait a second, maybe there's natural phenomena causing these things. I mean, he predicted an eclipse, a sun eclipse, and he was considered essentially a god for that afterwards. But the same thing when Pythagoras in the 6th century BC identified this Pythagorean theorem, which I'm sure everybody recoils
It's
from
giving me
high school
nightmares
math.
already. It's giving me
Yeah,
nightmares.
yeah,
Oh, yeah.
yeah. A squared plus B squared equals
Yeah.
C squared.
Soccer tower, your tan, all
Yeah.
this not. Yeah.
But the fact that you could find something universal that was
Mm.
always true was like mind-boggling. But a lot of the ideas that Pythagoras had, with regards to self-examination, holding oneself accountable, disciplining your thoughts and your body and your mind, moderation. I mean, he was absolutely instrumental in impacting later philosophers and all the way to the founding fathers and the Enlightenment. And he has a great image that kind of conveys sort of the gist of a lot of these philosophies, which is of this charioteer, which is like reason, and he's got 2 horses, and he's trying to keep them in check, and steer them in the right direction. And one is that passion, that drive, that emotion, and the other is sort of like the noble cause, the noble endeavors. And we need to have both of those kind of chained by reason to kind of live a purposeful life. But I mean, he influenced Cicero, Aristotle, Plutarch, and then the ideas of the founding fathers. I mean, they go straight back to Pythagoras' virtues, but also, of course, the pursuit of happiness is straight out of Epicureanism. Socrates.
Course.
Yeah, I mean, all of this
Interesting.
really,
Okay.
really fundamental. So, I mean, most people will recognize the name Socrates, of course, from the 5th century BC, who died of drinking hemlock. But one of the best things that he did is, this Socratic method is a way of thinking about the world. How do we question stuff? And a lot of this starts with saying you don't know. And I mean, do you know the story of Socrates and the Oracle of Delphi, where the
I'm not familiar with it, but I actually went to Delphi when I went to Greece last night. It was amazing. But yeah, no, I'm not
Yes.
I'm not familiar. Yeah.
Okay, so I'll just do a very, very quick recap because I think it'll get back to like a lot of the fundamentals of where you're starting. So essentially, Socrates had a friend who went to the Oracle of Delphi, and the Delphi was this place where they had the Pythia, like the most powerful woman in the ancient world, a priestess who would reveal like these very cryptic messages. And they asked, okay, who's the wisest of them all, And she said Socrates. And Socrates is like, no way. There's tons of people way smarter than me. Like, but she's speaking on behalf of the gods, and the gods can't be wrong. So why don't I just test this out? So he goes around and he starts asking all the wisest people, politicians and craftsmen and poets and all these sorts of people, and he makes them look like idiots, as Socrates knows how to do all too well. But in the process, he just shows them how much they don't know. And at the end, he says, well, maybe the oracle is right, not because I'm the wisest of all, but because this guy and me, we both don't know anything, but at least I know that I don't know everything.
Right.
And it's important what he says, though, because he says, I do not claim to know that which I do not know. And so this is very fundamental, because if you think you know something, you can't learn it. And so you have to start with the fundamentals of admitting you don't know. And that's like the heart of being a skeptic, is to realize what you don't know, to realize what you can't know. And from that point, when you realize what you don't know, then only then can you start building on what you do know. And then you can start thinking about how you know what you know. And you can think, do I learn by just my mind, like Zeno of Elia, and you can play with these paradoxes and trying to understand how we come to understand things, or do you learn just through observation, like Aristotle, and this, the art of really looking and paying attention? And once we start to think about how we know stuff, then we can really learn a lot more. And that's of course the root of like epistemology and all that, and that kind of sounds less exciting when you use the sort of academic terms, but at the heart of it is just trying to understand what we know. And but getting back to sort of the ideas of meaning and purpose of life, I mean, Aristotle, for instance, gives us so many ideas. So and the beauty is, like, you don't have to think one of these guys is right, but you can read a bunch of them and say, wow, I really agree with that, or I don't really agree with that. And when Plutarch started the Renaissance at his time period, like, he would embark in a great conversation with these ideas, and he would write letters to the ancients, and he'd get angry with them, like. So the idea isn't just to take these guys and put them on a pedestal and say, like, here's the answers. No, you're supposed to engage with these ideas. So Aristotle says, okay, the purpose of life, the meaning of life is to achieve human flourishing, eudaimonia. And how can we flourish? By being virtuous people. Okay, how do you be a virtuous person? Okay, there's certain things that, like being a good friend. Okay, what makes being a good friend? And these are things that, like, you can teach children, and they're so valuable, because even asking the question, what makes a good friend, makes you contemplate it and makes you act to therefore be a better friend. So it really starts with the seed of thinking
Yeah.
about these ideas, questioning them, and then building on them, the premise of how to live a good life. And I think when you start focusing on that, that doesn't need myth. It doesn't need any supernatural things. Like, you can be a good person anywhere in the world with
Yeah.
any value system behind you, with any culture behind you, like, by just talking about it and discussing it, like the love of wisdom and being a good person, like, I feel like that can be the unifying aspect.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. Just one point. I've got a few points. One of the points earlier that you mentioned was we can look at myth as myth because we're so removed from it, but people at the time, they can't, because that was literally there. They were in it, right?
Yeah.
And you were right that a lot of some early Greek historians started to say, actually, the reason why this is happening is not because of Zeus or not because of this some god, it's because of the seasons or because of actual scientific things, and that's a huge step in the right direction. So yes, although we look upon it kind of romantically, but you're right. We, I guess we have the luxury of looking at the myths as myths because we are removed from it. But we live in an era. I know this is going to sound controversial, but I'm an atheist. But we live in an era where a lot of religions that people practice now, I hope one day in 3,000 years they'll be like, oh, do you remember those guys used to believe in that myth about Jesus or Muhammad or whatever it is? But if you say that now, they'd be like, what are you talking about? This is a real religion and whatever it is. So we do have the luxury of being removed from the myths where we can enjoy it. And just a separate point, Vikings as well. They have their own myths, right? The Norse mythology. I've watched a lot of TV shows on Vikings, and I really enjoy it. But their religion was brutal, human sacrifice. I mean, even in South America and other parts of the world, um, some practice, some beliefs were absolutely brutal. We can enjoy it now because no one's doing it, but when you're in it, there's nothing enjoyable about it. So that is one very important point. I'm not trying to replace one religion with another religion, saying this is now it. Just saying that that type of thinking, it fosters more, I say, openness. I would say, and if we need stories, we have plenty of stories that we can access in the ancient world that could reflect and sort of represent our modern day problems. So yeah, that's a very fair point. And the second thing is around what you were saying, like, if you were to even ask the question, what makes a good friend or what makes a good husband or wife or whatever it may be, you might not. I mean, again, it reminds me of that. I can't remember if it was Socrates or not, where it goes, how many stones is a heap? Something along those lines. I don't know if was it that Socrates or was that someone else? I can't remember. Where he was talking to his friend and he said, like, how many stones is a heap? And he goes, they had a heap of stones. He goes, this is a heap or mound, whatever it is, I can't remember. And he goes, he counts it. He goes, 17 stones is a heap then. He goes, well, no, I mean, it could be 16. So how many stones makes a heap? And then he was thinking, actually, I don't know if there's a number that we can say once it passes over, like, what, 5 stones is now a heap. But the answer wasn't important. It was the question that was important. So I guess what you're saying, like when you say, for example, what makes a good friend, we might disagree on the answer, but the fact that we're asking these questions and it makes us aware, then
Yes.
that's the beginning of the conversation. And I think if we become a society that's more interested in the questions rather than the answers, because the answer, if you say you have an answer for something, it means we don't have to think about it anymore. If you say, bro, we've got new questions, and you're constantly thinking about it, and that's how you get progress, right?
Well, can I add an addendum to that? I don't think it's just the question. I think there is the answer, but the difference is that it's not about being right or wrong. It's about
Mm,
finding the truth. And I think right now, we live time period where a lot of people have a hard time having conversations, difficult conversations about
massively, massively.
politics and religion and just about everything.
Everything, yeah.
And this is another. There's just so many lessons from the ancient world that we can employ to be helpful at this point. And they had a lot of difficult questions too, and they really developed the art of rhetoric and debate and oratory skills and such. But one of the first things I always tell people when they're having these difficult questions is to establish a telos, which is the ancient Greek for like a goal. And so,
Mm,
for instance, if you're having a really difficult conversation, but you establish early on that you have the same goal, but you're just trying to get to there separately, like you're like, okay, I want children to be safe.
right.
Everyone is in agreement. Okay, so if we're talking about gun laws or free speech or pedophilia or whatever it is, like let's start off with this is what we're trying to get to. We have the same goal of keeping children safe. How can we do that? And so I think it's important to remember that just because people are being honest doesn't necessarily mean that they have the truth. So
Mm,
we're trying to get to a truth if we're actively working together constructively to get to the truth, and you don't mind if you're wrong, because being wrong means you learn something. Like if we take the stigma out of that, um, I think that would be really valuable, that people would be able to say like, oh no, I was wrong, I've learned something now, I'm happy that I've learned something, I'm growing.
yeah, I think you're absolutely right, especially when it comes to any discussion nowadays is so just we assume the person that we're speaking against is a bad person, rather than they just maybe have a different opinion. Whether it's like you're saying politics or gender, it's become very strained in sort of like men women relationships, trans, all these various controversial, Israel Palestine, whatever, right? The person who's arguing against me must be evil. It's just a given now. Forget about we haven't even got to. Do we have an agreed goal? It says that this person, whatever he says, I'm going to oppose it, right? And I think it's very sad that a lot of the conversations that happen nowadays in the news and on social media is so heated and so um, uh, polarizing, and we can't even get to the point where we agree to have the same goal. That would be the first thing. Are we actually arguing in the same direction here? Are we talking about the same thing and hoping for the same outcome? Because if that's the case, then we can have a discussion. But if we're not even arguing about the same thing and want the same outcome, then what are we really doing?
Yeah.
Yeah, then what's the point of this conversation? And I
So
think,
one,
yeah.
yeah, go.
No, please, 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 yeah,
No, I was just gonna say another of one of my favorite Epictetus quotes. I'm obviously a big Epictetus fan for
yep,
for all the people who love Stoicism. It's pretty hard to beat this guy. He has another great line. He's like, "What's the proposed reason for object of reasoning?" He's like, to determine what is true, to eliminate the false, and to suspend judgment in all other cases. And this
mm,
is key because we need to practice suspending judgment, like and truly listening to the other side with open ears and open mind, because otherwise we can't. If we just keep reinforcing our own ideas, we're never going to learn the truth of the
no.
situation. Like we have to sit there and genuinely read the other newspaper. Listen to the
Oh,
other idea.
oh. But you're right, because the whole thing in YouTube is now so algorithm, where they just keep giving you what you like, then you realize you must think everyone must think like me. So, if I meet a Republican or Democrat or left wing guy or right wing guy, like, like they're the enemy, or some people think that these people don't even exist. So people are so surprised when Trump won or Biden won or whoever it may be. Like, I've never met a conservative person in my life, or I've never met a liberal person in my life. Like, they do exist. You just have to leave your house.
Yep.
It's not hard to find them. But you're right, and it's okay if I take there's some interesting questions here just from the
Yep.
question section here. So someone's saying Anya is right. Greek religion was more matriarchal in the past and became more patriarchal after 600 BC. Why is that, Anya? What caused the change?
Oh, I wish I knew the answer to that. It is an excellent question. And it's interesting because we can see that trend again and again in various different places with regards to statues, how they evolve. In the Odyssey and Iliad, Penelope is like the main star
Mm.
of these epics. Helen of Troy, like she's so important, Helen of Sparta, because women were the king makers.
Mm.
They had the power. And there's many times in the Odyssey, like when Odysseus arrives, in an island, and they're like, you've got to talk to the queen first. Like she is the one who matters.
Oh.
So we see it over and over again. Some of it might be just the winning cultures, like when the Minoans were overtaken by the Mycenaeans, the Bronze Age collapse, really shook things up when there was sort of the massive volcano and everything, and you had the Phoenicians, and kind of there was just huge upheaval. So I don't know the exact answer to that, but I think one of my jobs at Classical Wisdom is to sort of show people that the classical world is not just like a flat line and they were down here and we've gone up here. No, we
It's
have
up and down.
cycles. Yeah, yeah, and
Okay,
it's important to see those cycles.
can I again, I'm not a scholar. I'm just an armchair guy whatever. I'm so don't think I'm going to be Socratic and say I don't know what I don't know, but I'm just going to propose a theory. Is it possible that some societies are more like their values are more masculine than feminine, or sometimes they're more feminine than masculine? So, for example, people say rightly wrong. Society 30 years ago was more masculine and more toxic masculine. It was very dog eat dog, and now we are more aware. We have more mental health, things like that. The workplace has changed very radically, and you could argue it's more feminine. I'm not saying it's good or bad. I'm just saying it's more feminine. So maybe in societies that were more or less warlike, would it be like you were saying, Hestia and Persephone? Was it Persephone?
Or
In
Demeter, I
an
was saying,
era,
but Persephone
yeah,
is a good one too.
a good one. Yeah, sorry, yeah. In a society where you have more peace or more, I don't know, where femininity or feminine energy is more rewarded, then it would make sense for them to prop up or promote the more feminine gods. Whereas if in a society where it's more warlike and more aggressive and more sort of man versus man, tribe versus tribe, then of course you're gonna have Aries. You're not gonna have or Mars. You're not gonna have a Demeter because you're in a different state of mind. It's the same way. Um, you know, I guess forget gods. Let's say Churchill. Even Churchill now. Some people say, "Oh, he was a racist, or he was this, and he was that." But 50 years ago, Churchill was a different. Again, we've seen his evolution as well. So I'm just kind of proposing a theory. I don't know if that makes sense or not.
Well, no, like we were saying before that how the gods sort of reflect the society. Just as a good one to throw in is the Amazons, and you referenced
Yes.
one of
Yep.
them earlier. Just as an interesting insight, the sort of female warriors, or probably the Scythians, they were beloved in the ancient world. Like the number one Greek motif in vases was the Amazons. Like there was a whole other chapter to the Iliad, which was dedicated basically to the battle between Achilles and the Queen of the Amazons, and he fell in love with her. She was held up as this
What was her name
archetype.
again? Her
Yeah,
name. Uh, Oh, I was gonna
yeah,
say
yeah.
penicillin.
I also
Um, yeah, yeah. I'm gonna find it, but yeah. Go for it. Sorry, yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Penicillin.
so,
Yeah, I
yeah.
can't.
The,
Yeah.
the the beauty is, well, I wanted to say I love that with the ancient Greeks. Like when you study ancient Greek, you can always rely on the fact that you don't have to pronounce things correctly because nobody really knows how they were pronounced. And that's one of the things I loved about studying like dead languages because you never have to speak them, and then you still do someday. So,
Yep.
um, but yes, it's just very interesting to know that yeah, it's just not a straight line, and that many times the ancient world women were really held up much higher than maybe they even are today sometimes.
Hmm. Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And I guess the only thing I can think of is the way we view people like a Churchill. Some people love him. I guess he's in a sense like a modern day hero or a very small kind of god in the sense that he plays that role. He defines, um, or rather, you're defined by him. If you think he's a good guy, then I already probably know half your politics, more than half your politics. If you don't like him, then probably
Yeah,
know the other half, right? So if you're
yeah,
someone who's devoted to, I don't know, Athena versus Mars or Aries, and you say, oh, okay, I know what kind of guy you are,
yeah.
depending on which god you pray to or respect. So I guess we haven't really lost gods; they're just smaller and more now.
Well, yeah,
Um,
it's just a very interesting thing because we have replaced a lot of religion with civic religion,
mm,
and so and this is something that you see in sociology and such like that. Like if you go to a battlefield in the United States, for instance, people take on like a religious air, like
yeah,
respect, and so people will still take their icons, and they've just replaced it with the state rather than the church or something.
yeah, absolutely, yeah. And just on, you could say, um, as a how would you put it? I'm trying to be as direct as possible without being too direct. Do we need a renaissance of Greco-Roman myth and philosophy? Let's put the whole thing into in one package. And will that come at the cost of our current Abrahamic worldview?
Yes. um,
And that's all we have
well,
time for. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
that's all
yeah,
right. No,
yeah.
no matter what history you're studying, I think it's never a good idea to say we don't need history anymore. I mean,
Mm,
that's just a bad idea. What they did accomplish in the ancient Greek world and in the Roman world is phenomenal. That's not to say that they didn't also accomplish amazing things in China and India and all throughout the
Middle
world
East,
at
everywhere,
different.
of course. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. There's fantastic documents, artworks that you can find. And so if for instance, if you're particularly interested in another type of history, like go for it. I think that's wonderful. The Greco-Roman world is particularly fascinating because we have so much documentation of that time period. So we just have a lot more information there than we do in some other places. As a consequence, that era then is hugely influential for every subsequent era. So like I always say like, hey, if you want to read Nietzsche or Freud, like you got to read the classics. If you want to enjoy going to the Louvre or the Prado, like you got to study the classics. If you want to
Absolutely.
understand subsequent philosophy, literature, art,
Disney movies, even Disney.
oh, for
Oh,
sure.
no, no, but seriously, yeah. I mean, we speaking about Marvel, and their whole thing was around Thor and all these. They're basically modern age gods. These superheroes. They're basically modern age gods. Yeah, absolutely right. Yeah.
And it's always good to see. I always use that example actually, that how we can kind of play with the story. Like everybody knows the Batman story gist, and then we can make a new one, a prequel, a sequel. The myths
Variation. Yeah.
were the same in the ancient world. So
Mm,
you think of the Jason and Medea story. There was a very different tradition of it. And Corinth, Euripides, the famous tragedian, like he would play with the myth, and he actually made Medea much more dramatic, we'll say, murderous than
when I
was the
heard that myth, I
original.
was like scared because I'm like, she is psycho. When someone just does something crazy and doesn't even flinch, it's like, what the hell?
Well,
Whoa.
just to our point very initially about myth is history and history is myth.
Yeah.
I was recently in Georgia, which was like in Tbilisi, and the land of Colchi is where Medea is from, and it was fascinating to see like the 8th century treasury that they had. That this was an extremely wealthy, rich country. And when you take the story of Jason going after the golden fleece, the historian
Mm.
Strabo was like, no, no, he was literally going after the wealth of the Colchi kingdom, and she was this princess from the Colchi kingdom. So it's
Wow.
just it's absolutely amazing when you see like how these things all kind of fit together. And again, all the original stories of her, she is not a fraction of the evil that Euripides makes her, and it's just the Euripides version that's sort of dominant. I mean, in the original Corinthian version where it takes place, the townspeople kill her children, not her. So it's
Oh, I see.
vindication for Medea. Another perfect example, just to say, of how the earlier traditions, the women are not so evil.
Wow, that's incredible. Because again, like you were saying, the same myth can have different versions, and sometimes the hero is born by different has different parentage or whatever. So when I heard this version, it was when she was on the boat escaping her father, or helping Jason escape her father. She
Yeah.
killed her younger brother and then threw him in the sea, knowing full well that the father would have to come and take the son and have to bury him, which would give them more time to escape, whatever it be. So wow, okay. Wow, that's a very I mean that does change the complexion a lot. Yeah, that does change the complexion a lot of the whole story. And why again, maybe you don't know the answer, but why would someone want to make her specifically look bad? Is it just because is it to justify that Jason escaped her? Because Jason didn't marry her. I think is it that he
He
left her
did
out?
marry her. He did marry her, and then he left her for a local princess. And
That's the
that
one.
was like
Yes.
you could have mistresses and such, but
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
um, yeah. No, so basically, like Euripides was he's kind of like the Christopher Nolan of the tragedians. Like he made
Mm,
everything dark and twisted. So it's the same thing with the Electra, the Orestes trilogy as well. He makes like Electra the murderer of her parents. Like he takes everything and he just makes it one bit more dark because that made it interesting. That was like
right.
the twisted, thrilling, dark element of it. And that's another interesting kind of cyclical thing that you see that with the arts and with theater and drama and stuff. Like right now we live in a time period where people are very accustomed to extreme violence,
Mm,
and we're sort of numb to that, but there's obviously time periods when that wasn't okay. And I was a few years back, I saw Titus Andronicus in the Globe in London, and that play was so violent, so like hard to watch. There was people there to help women who were fainting, people fainting because the violence was so extreme. And that play couldn't be performed for a couple hundred years because society just deemed it way too violent. So in Shakespeare's
incredible.
time, it was okay. We went through a societal like period where we said, no, we can't watch something like that. And then now we're on this other side of extreme violence.
Well, we
So
got Game of Thrones and whatnot. Yeah, yeah,
yeah, well, video games, things like that.
yeah,
So
yeah.
you think similarly, like the earlier plays by Aeschylus, they just by the time Euripides is writing, he's got a crowd to please. He's
Mm,
he's trying to win the prizes at the Dionysia. He's competing like for essentially the ancient Greek Oscars, and
yeah.
maybe the more thrilling and dark it is, the more they like it at that time.
Yeah,
So
I guess that reflects people's taste as well. Like, I guess it's a two-way thing because if he had created something dark and people were like, "This is not," then he probably would have stopped doing it, right? But if people
yeah.
were like, "Wow, this is amazing," then that's his cue to continue writing in that vein. So yeah, absolutely right. Um, I'd like to do a thought experiment with you. Let's say, for example, we were to introduce some sort of Greek mythology or some sort of Greek philosophy, love back into the West today in a 500 years from now. Again, no easy questions. 500 years from now, how would what would look different about the West if you were to take this experiment? Today's our starting point, and we were to go 500 years. We have this renaissance of Greek mythology, philosophy, all this stuff. How would we differ now, or would it be something impossible to answer? Like we would never know what it would look like.
I'm not sure I understand. You're saying like if we did have a Greek Renaissance right now, what would
Yes.
the world look like in 500 years?
Well, yeah. More specifically, the West, because I guess like
Yeah.
other cultures might not. adopt that way of thinking. But if we were to sort of say, you know what, our founding fathers or whatever are now Hercules and Antigone and Prometheus instead of the Abrahamic ones, and what could what would be different about our character and the way
Well, I think
it is?
there is a classical renaissance happening. Like it's happening right now. The thing is, though, and this is kind of interesting, is I guess at every time period, people take ancient stuff and they incorporate it into their current beliefs and philosophies. So, right now in America, there's definitely a classical education renaissance, and people
Really?
are it's growing tremendously rapidly. The idea of bringing back ancient philosophies and ideas and mythologies, and people are teaching it to their children. There's a renewal in, specifically in the U.S. of studying ancient Greek, even,
Wow.
and it's important. We need translators at every stage because that can be gatekeepers to this ancient wisdom. So you want people of all sorts of backgrounds. You'll find it fascinating to see what people can learn and understand with fresh eyes to the ancient texts themselves. Spearheading a lot of this, though, is quite a Christian
I
movement.
was just going
So
to ask that question. Is the demographic behind this a lot of Christians? Because
the
I've always wondered, how does that work? Like, you have a very Abrahamic belief system, yet you respect the classics, which are pagan.
yes. So I mean, one of I think the ways that that works is the early Christian beliefs. Well, one, Christ lived and died during the Greco-Roman era. A lot of early Christianity is based on Greco-Roman culture. Like easily a case could be made that Jesus was a cynic. I mean, he lived cynicism in the ancient world was like a lifestyle rather than like a specific set of philosophies. And same with Stoicism, Epicureanism, hedonism. A lot of these words have been completely divorced from what they meant in the ancient world. The cynic was a completely different type of person than when I say the word cynic now, people would think. But the ancient version of cynicism, Jesus would have followed a lot of that lifestyle. A lot of early Christian beliefs and mythologies is based on the kind of cult of Marathis. So there's a lot of crossover. And then early Christian thinkers and philosophers and leaders, were influenced by the ancient Greeks and Romans, and they were considered virtuous pagans. So that's how they were. They didn't have Jesus before that.
Mm.
So that's how they could kind of incorporate it. But because people were so interested in the time period of Jesus and the direct influences of him, that's how it's sort of incorporated. And a lot of people learn ancient Greek so they can read the Bible. And
Of course.
so I mean, yeah, it's interesting because that obviously is going to have a certain light on it. Like I operate classical wisdom not with a focus of religion or not religion. I want to make sure that the
It's
classics
open
can
to
be
everyone.
enjoyed
Yeah.
to everyone, and then I think that's kind of a little bit unique in what I'm doing because a lot of the resources and influences are so Christian based. So,
Mm.
but it's important to remember, just to say one little thing too, and I know I keep saying that, it's important to remember, but the love of ancient world is completely international,
Yes.
and it is something that it does not just belong to one group of people. I mean, I live in Argentina. The number one author of Argentina, Borges, was a classicist through and through. I mean, he's popular in the Far East. It's popular in Africa. I wrote a foreword to a book about Ubuntu and Stoicism. Like it's a
Wow.
universal thing, and it's one of the best things about studying this is again we're kind of part all of this in this together. That's part of the
Mm.
meaning and purpose. Like we're a continuation of humanity, and
Absolutely.
part of our job is to preserve that thread, to continue these ideas and to preserve them, the great ideas from all over the world, with everyone around the world. So
Yeah,
good.
absolutely. And actually, I went to, funny enough, last year I went to Athens So I saw Athens, then I went to Delphi, which is where you saw the Oracle of Delphi, which is an amazing experience. And then I went to Rome and I saw all the Roman monuments and stuff. And then I obviously went to the Vatican in Rome. And obviously in the Vatican in Rome is where you see all of these classical sculptures and paintings, and I also went to the Louvre as well. So I kind of last year was my just like classical like heaven, wherever it was. But again, I was speaking to one of the tour guides there. She was Christian Catholic, and I was like, this is the Vatican. This is the home of Catholicism. Yet you keep so many like pagan or non-Christian paintings and sculptures. Like, how do you like reconcile that? You know, because technically speaking, they shouldn't even be here, right? This is pre-Christian, and some of their beliefs are very much against your religion. And she said that, you know, we recognize this is our history, that this is our past, and you know, we don't agree with it, but we respect it and we want to protect it. You know, so that was something which really I liked, because we could, like I said, going back to, I might not agree with your point of view, but I understand it's part of my cultural heritage as well.
Yep.
And again, going back to a more modern problem, is people today wanted to burn down or tear down statues. It's like, you might not like the statue, but understand that this is part of the history, and you can protest against it, but understand that, like you were saying, like this is the same way God has evolved. We have now, like you're saying, civic religion that evolves, and church was a hero, then he's a villain, and then in 100 years time he's probably a hero again. So I think we need to have that appreciation that, yeah, some things can be uncomfortable for us, but there's a reason why it's probably there. And understanding the history behind that is probably what informs us, and it gives us more of a perspective as to the evolution of our own thought as well.
Yeah, well, and we can learn just as much from bad examples in history as we can from good examples.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
know, like if not more. So um, we should uh, we should endeavor to learn as much as we can.
Absolutely. I know I've taken you so much of your time, but I've honestly enjoyed it so much. I could ask you so much more, so many more fine, minute questions about mythology, which I'm dying to do. But I know it's been a great, great conversation with yourself. Is there any other sort of last words, or I mean, you want to tell people how to get in touch with classical wisdom, if you're on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter, like sort of give a shout out to all of your different links and stuff.
Yeah, well, thank you. Well, thank you for having me. Also,
No,
I've
pleasure, pleasure.
thoroughly enjoyed, and I welcome the opportunity always to get to talk about these ideas and concepts. So, yeah, you can find me at classicalwisdom.com. We're on Substack, so it can also be classicalwisdom.substack.com. We have absolutely free newsletter. We write articles. The what I was talking about, Hera, actually was one of our most recent pieces. So if you want to learn about the pre-Greek life and love of Hera, we've got that one. And well, actually, my very last one was about Hypatia, the astronomer. We are also on YouTube. So if you want to see interviews with different professors, we do events. We've done ones on like the philosophy of anxiety. We've also do like deep dives in the Battle of Actium or Thermopylae, and everything in between. So we try to cover philosophy, mythology, literature. We've got a big event on Demeter, the hymn of Demeter, coming up in August. It's a few months away, but so we do try to cover quite a lot, and it's just a real pleasure to be here. So thank you.
Absolute pleasure once again. Everyone, please check it out, classicalwisdom.com, on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, everything. I would really, really advise everyone and encourage everyone, if you don't know about the classics, even if it's other classics or other mythologies, please, please do so. It's a whole. I'm quoting Aladdin now. It's a whole new world, whatever it is, you know. Okay, that's over. When you start quoting Aladdin, then you know your time is up. But thank you, Anya, and thank you everyone for watching and for your questions. Please feel free to classicalwisdom.com, check it out, and we'll see you guys very soon. Thank you, everyone. Cheers.
All right, thank you.